No matter what kind of project you have around the shop, if you're looking for some tips and some help, it's time for Sam's Garage, presented by ARP, with Master Mechanic Sam Mamola.
Welcome back to Sam's Garage. We've got a pretty nice truck here in the garage today. It's a 1970. It's a CST-10, custom sport truck. It's a great model, very fancy truck. This belongs to the local sheriff here in town. This was his uncle's truck who bought it brand new in 1970. It's a survivor. It's had a repaint, it's had a carpet. But let me show you up under the hood. This truck was loaded. Automatic transmission, factory air conditioning, of course, power brakes. This is drum brakes all around. And it's a neat truck. Unfortunately, his uncle didn't get a chance to enjoy it. It sat for a long time. It's been repainted, but this truck's only got 6,200 miles on it. He brought it to me and said, Sam, it's been sitting for a long time. Brakes feel a little mushy. He's had a master cylinder replacement someplace in his life. It's ugly, it's all rusty. Brake booster's leaking. So I said, hey, let's do a little dress up. We'll save the original stuff. Let's put a nice chrome alternator on it. High output alternator, one wire. Bring him into the 21st century. Let's put a chrome booster and master cylinder and a proportioning valve. So we're gonna fix it up. Let me show you what we're gonna use here. All these products are from Tough Stuff. You know, the neat part about Tough Stuff is they call it Cleveland Chrome. This is made in the United States. Their chrome will get you home, is what they say. And we've got a nice alternator, and of course we've got a booster master cylinder combination. We have a proportioning valve. This is four-wheel drum brakes. If you had a disc drum combination, you'd need a combination valve. But the folks at Tough Stuff, they know your applications. And again, the master cylinder for drum brakes front and rear are different. Got all the bracketry, everything we need. I'm going to show you some brake bleeding tips, and then we'll talk about this alternator. First thing I need to do is get inside. Those brackets that hold the booster are bolted underneath, so I've got to get underneath there and take some of these bolts out. These lines have been in this proportioning valve forever, and the nut had rusted to the steel line, okay? And it was bound. I put some penetrating solution on there, and then I worked it back and forth so I don't twist the line. These are tubing wrenches. Some people call them flat nut wrenches. You need to use those. If you use a regular open end wrench, I'm telling you, you just round off those fittings and you'll be done. So we're going to take the lines, now these go to the brakes, the fronts and the rears, out of the proportioning valve, and of course it comes out of the master cylinder. I'm not going to mess with these because I'm going to take the proportioning valve and master cylinder, take these two bolts off, the whole bracket. So all I really need to save are these lines here. And I've done a pretty good job. If you're not careful, you will twist them like spaghetti, so make sure you use plenty of penetrating oil. Now you can see I've got plenty of shop towels down here. You're going to get some fluid leaking out. And remember, brake fluid will take paint off, so I'm trying to preserve everything I can here. We're not going to get a lot. Now I take these two bolts and I can take the master cylinder off. Make sure you always use a fender cover. If the bolt starts to drag, turn it back a little bit and let the penetrating oil work its way in there. That way you won't gall the threads. This doesn't want to fight. Oh, that rust's coming out of there. You can see this pedal rod comes out here to the brake pedal. That goes through to the booster and actuates the master cylinder. Now today's cars, you just got a pin and a clip. Look at this, they've got it bolted. Looks like a jam nut, and it's even got a cotter pin. They didn't want this to come out, that's for sure. So I'll work at this cotter pin a little bit. Get that squeezed down and then pull it out. Okay, as you can see, this is a nut and a bolt arrangement. You have to hold the back side of it with a wrench. It's pretty flat, so you got to really work at holding it. And it'll give you much to bite onto. And of course, when you're in a position like this, not a lot of room to work, not a pleasant position. The threads are real long and they're real fine. That's always the way it'll be. Okay, now we'll pull this assembly out of here. And you can see, and again, I keep stopping to wash my hands. Brake fluid eats up paint. Anything you touch, I don't want to make stains on this guy's paint. If you look back here, I'm going to clean this up a little bit. The grommet's pretty good. Everything looks good. But you can see here, see how it's wet? And the wet's coming down here. The master cylinder's been leaking out the back seal into the booster. You get fluid in there long enough, the vacuum booster diaphragm deteriorates. That's why this isn't working good. So the master cylinder's bad, the booster's bad. I'm going to clean things up. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll put all our good-looking, tough stuff in.
Sam's Garage, presented by ARP, is brought to you by 3M. For more information on 3M products, go to 3mcollision.com. Hypertech, the leader in high-performance engine tuning products. LMC Truck. Restore, maintain, customize. Parts and accessories for Chevy, GMC, Ford, and Dodge trucks and SUVs. By ARP, the world leader in fastener technology.
Welcome back to Sam's Garage. We're continuing on with our 1970 Chevy CST. I've assembled our tough stuff chrome master, the booster, and all the linkage. Now you see the rod that goes into the pedal, that push rod has adjustments on it, has a clevis that I'll put on underneath. You want to have free play. When you're all done and you bleed your brakes out, your brake pedal should move between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch before it contacts the inside of the master cylinder. When you take your foot off the brakes, the master cylinder piston has to travel all the way back to release pressure, otherwise your brakes will drag. So I'll get everything together. The only thing I'm going to change is this thing came complete with a check valve for the vacuum booster. The only thing I'm going to take out of my pocket is some fresh plated nuts and lock washers. So go through the same grommet, put it up on your brackets. It's a handful. And you got all of that assembly there, it's pretty heavy. I'll put some nuts on this and I'll tighten it up. I'll go underneath and put our clevis on, hook it to the brake pedal, the same way we took it off. And then we'll take a look at the proportioning valve and how to hook that up. Okay, now we're moving on to the proportioning valve. Now again, this is not a combination valve, it's a proportioning valve because we've got 4-wheel drum brakes. If you had a disc drum combination, you need to have a combination valve because it's a proportioning valve and a metering valve that holds the front brakes off till at least build about 100 psi, and the rear brakes come on first. So this is a proportioning valve. They got a nice chrome bracket here from Tough Stuff. Now there's a brake light switch in here. There's a little piston that moves. You got equal pressure on both sides. When you step on the brakes, equal pressure on the piston, it can't move. If you get a hydraulic fluid leak in either circuit, you'll lose pressure on one side. The little piston will move, grounds this little switch, turns your warning light on. Tough Stuff supplies you with a nice new connector for your brake warning light switch. It's a single wire. You just hook it, splice it right in. This is the old factory one. We're going to replace that. This bolts right on the side of the booster. And you just take off this little 3/8 nut that holds it on. You get these nice little formed lines. They're really beautiful. They got nice fittings on them. They come with the proportioning valve. So you want to leave this loose so you can fit your lines. And again, we're going to put these down. These look really nice. And start them by hand. Make sure you get the angle right. See, I've left this loose so I can pivot it. Never force a fitting, because if you get it started wrong, then bingo, you're going to strip it. You should be able to put it in most of the way by hand. Okay, got that line set up. And of course, it's dictated by the size of the fittings and where it's going to go. This one will probably go this way. That looks a little better. One leg is longer than the other. There. I've got those all started, nice and by hand. So then what I do is I would take my tubing wrenches. Again, these are really pretty. Tough Stuff did a nice job on it. Then don't go rounding them off. Use your tubing wrench. Get these tightened up nice. That way they won't have any marks on it. Once you've got all these lines tightened up, then you can go ahead and tighten up this bolt that holds the bracket to the master cylinder and booster. That's nice, everything's bolted, it looks good. You can wipe your fingerprints off it and make it real pretty. It's a nice piece of equipment. The next thing to do is to hook up the steel tubing that'll go down to the wheels. But I'm going to stop right here. This truck is 46, going on 47 years old. These lines are so rusty, I just can't, it's brakes, it's safety stuff. I'm going to make some new steel tubing, at least down to the junction box down below. And that way, we're going to have a good, safe brake system. I might even pull the wheels. Again, this truck's been sitting a long time. It's got wheel cylinders and brake shoes. I'll bet you the wheel cylinder's leaking. And if they aren't, when you get through with the new master cylinder, they probably will be. So I got a wire in my, wire from my brake warning light switch. I'm going to make up some steel tubings. Next thing we want to do is we want to put our alternator on. Let me show you the alternator we've got. Again, this is a GM. This is a single wire, one wire, self-exciting regulator. Really a pretty piece of equipment. Got a nice nose cone on it. It's for a V-belt. They also have them for serpentine belts. But here's an interesting thing. A lot of these trucks have a warning light. Go to a one-wire alternator, your warning light doesn't work anymore. It can make the guy angry or the gal angry. They have a terminal in here. We can run the wire for the warning light right there. The warning light will work. It makes everything right. So I'm going to go ahead. I got my battery cables disconnected. They're going to be replaced anyway. They're junk. And I'm going to go ahead and take this alternator off and swap it. Okay, the alternator's on. I tensioned the belt, but it's not much of a belt. So this truck's going to get belts too. Again, it's a project, you know, when you got some miles on it. Now, a little tab is a piece of paper here stuck on the alternator. It says it's a grounding tab. It's right here. And Tough Stuff recommends that you take a 10-gauge wire, go to the chassis, the engine block, best go right to the battery. The good news is the alternator we removed, the standard old GM alternator. Here's our stator feed, and then our wires for our light or our gauge. This had an external regulator. We're eliminating that. But it also had a ground wire. I like the ground alternators. It's a great way to go. So this can run right there. I'll clean it up. It's pretty stout wire. Clean these wires up, make it nice and neat. Again, a few more things to do to this, and it'll be running down the road and he'll be happy. We'll be back in a few minutes. Don't go away. We're still having fun here at Sam's Garage. Got this 2011 Silverado. This is the one we put the big wheels and tires on, front and rear sway bars. You know, these trucks sit low in the front, so this guy wants it leveled. And these are real easy to do. You probably put a bunch of these in if you do have a shop. Got a 2-inch spacer that goes right in here. It's going to lift it up, make the truck sit nice and level. They're pretty easy to put in, except this has got upper and lower control arms, plus the spring strut or spring and shock combination, which is a lot like a McPherson strut. So we're going to take all this apart. First thing we did was we pulled the inner fender skirt out, get that panel out of the way, and you can get at the bolts on the top, and then we can get at these wires here. This is your ABS sensor wire. You don't want to tear that. We'll unplug it here. I'm going to take my tie rod end out, pop that loose, ball joint. I've got the lower control arm supported. So let me pop that out and we'll go ahead and take it apart. All right, now I've got the bottom of the shock here disconnected from the lower control arm. When you take those bolts out, it wants to drop the control arm down, so I got a support here. And the reason you're supporting it, because you know you got your wire disconnected for your ABS. Don't want to put too much strain on your brake caliper hose, but you don't want the axle to pop out of the front differential. All right, so now I've got 3 bolts up here. And you can see this wire harness, it had, of course, these little plastic pieces that clipped it on to the bolts. These bolts up here, take those 3 bolts out, and we'll be having that strut in our hand. Okay, once you get your assembly out, you can see these are the studs that retained it in the vehicle, and you get a spacer that goes on top. Let me stand this up a little bit so you can see how it works. That's real simple. That drops on top like that, but what you will see is that we don't have many threads here for the studs, so you can't just put that on. With the kit, you get a nice set of studs, the thread extenders, they go on there, but then it would be too tall. So you got to do a little cutting. It's really simple. You lay this down, they give you a couple of nuts in the kit that you'll run down on the stud. And of course, what we'll do is we'll put both nuts on, and then we'll measure them up to 3/4 of an inch, and then we'll cut the stud with the die grinder. All right, remember now, when you're putting this back in, you've added 2 inches of dimension, so it's going to push your lower control arm away a little bit. It's a little bit of a wrestling match, so the nuts that go on top that retain the strut up here to the chassis, don't tighten them all the way until you put your lower shock bolts in, then tighten them up easily. I'll tighten these all up, put our upper ball joint in, tie rod in, our wires in a fender skirt, and we'll see how it looks. All right, got everything back together. Everything's tight. All the wires are back in place. Inner fender skirt's on. All that's left is for me to tighten up our sway bar link, and I'll be all set, and I can do the other side. We got a lot more coming, so stick around as we take a quick break here at Sam's Garage.
Sam's Garage, presented by ARP, is brought to you by Advertising Edge, the official uniform of the NHRA. By HE&M Saw, the saw that cuts straight. By Hedman Performance Group, Hedman Headers, Transdap, and Hamburgers Performance, quality automotive products since 1954. By ARP, the world leader in fastener technology.
You know, you're doing a restoration, you've worked hard to get the metal right, you've welded, you grind, you get the body slick, then you go through the paint process. Primer, a lot of block sanding, base coat, clear coat, maybe you're using a one-stage urethane, color sanding and buffing, you got it looking good. Don't ruin it by putting on some old molding. You can go to OPGI and get their restoration parts. Now these have the original finish, they're OEM quality, and of course, take this as a drip rail molding for an A-body. It's brilliant anodized aluminum, and the way it's stamped and made, it's not bent like some of the other people bend them. These are actually stamped out. It's a correct fit. It'll latch on to the drip rail properly. And they've got a wide variety of products. They cover all kinds of restoration stuff. And of course, the precise and correct fit, the best quality and price guarantee, OPGI has got you covered. Now, if it's an aluminum molding and it's got a steel framework, it'll be just like GM made it. It'll come with all the clips and fasteners that you need right in the bag from OPGI. So again, top off your restoration with some real high quality restoration parts. Again, these are OEM quality, made to the highest industry standards. Put it on there and your vehicle's gonna look great and you'll be real proud of it. You know, no matter what kind of a day I have, no matter how hard it is, whatever I work on, I have fun in the garage, but I have more fun when I come and work on this little engine here. Now this is really starting to look like something, time to put all the accessories on. You know, when you get to this point, you've put a lot of time, a lot of money into your engine. You know, you're spending some money to do it right. Here's one of the things that you're going to top it off with, a nice new balancer. Now, don't ruin the engine by putting the balancer on like so many do with something like this or a lot bigger. You know, you've got a keyway. The key is up here, that's your Woodruff key, and you have a corresponding key in the balancer. Got it lubed up good, the seal is lubed, position it on, square it. Now, when you start driving that with a hammer, think about it. It's not good for the balancer, but think about the crankshaft. You have a flange bearing or a thrust bearing that controls the crankshaft end float. Soft bearing material. When you're pounding away, you're driving that surface of that crank up against that bearing. You're not doing the bearings any favor. Use an installing tool. Screws into the front of the crankshaft where the balancer retaining bolt goes. And these aren't that expensive. Buy a good one. If you're only going to do one engine, you can usually rent them from the auto parts store. This screws in. Now, I don't have a deep enough socket, so I made a little cheater collar here. This has a bearing in it, so it allows the nut to turn without putting too much stress on it. I've got some nice extreme pressure lube on the threads. Put something like that or some Molly on there. And then once it's square, it'll start going in real easy for you. You just take that and walk the balancer in until it bottoms out. You know, when you lubricate things and make sure they got no burrs on them, it'll go on real easy. Now, besides the harmonic balance, I've got a rear seal to install on these Fords. There's different ways of doing it, but there is a nice rear seal installing tool. You put the seal in, put the tool on a couple bolts, and it draws the seal into the right place, just the right depth. That's a great way to go. We put our cooling system together, put our Hedman headers on it, get our fuel injection on it, our Phi-Tech fuel injection. Got a bunch of things to do. Then we'll put it on the Easy One engine testing. We'll wire it. I'm putting an HEI distributor in this, single wire. And of course, I got to come up with some pulleys to run the water pump and turn the alternator. Pretty soon, we'll have it on the Easy Run stand and we'll be firing it up. Hope you learned something. See you next week.